Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ που δεν είστε σε μια παραλία να κάνετε μπάνιο και είστε εδώ μαζί μας σήμερα. Ευχαριστούμε και τους ομιλητές γι' αυτό. Αυτό θα πει πίστη στην τέχνη, αλλά βέβαια δεν είναι και πάντα δεδομένο η μόρφωση. Ας πούμε ότι εδώ στο Art-Athina οι άνθρωποι αυτοί και οι χθεσινοί που ακούσαμε, όλοι έχουν έρθει όχι με τα δικά τους έξοδα, αλλά να μιλήσουν pro bono, ενώ δουλεύουν δηλαδή χωρίς καμία αμοιβή από πουθενά. Και δεν είναι και Έλληνες. Και αυτό είναι κάτι που έτσι θα πρέπει να το τονίζουμε, γιατί παρόλο τις επιχορηγήσεις που μπορεί να παίρνουν ορισμένοι φορείς στην Ελλάδα, αυτοί οι άνθρωποι ήρθαν εδώ για να βοηθήσουν την Ελλάδα και χωρίς να πληρώνονται. Επομένως, βοηθάνε και αυτοί. Σήμερα έχουμε μαζί μας τον Adnan Yildiz, τον καλλιτεχνικό διευθυντή του Künstlerhaus της Stuttgart, ο οποίος θα μιλήσει η ομιλία του θα είναι γύρω από το Audience, Time and Space, κοινό, χρόνος και χώρος. Έχουμε μαζί μας τον Ricardo Nicolau, ο οποίος είναι ο Deputy Director, υποδιευθυντής του Serralves Museum, και θα μιλήσει για το νότο, όπως και εμάς, A User's Manual Curating in the Age of Ideological Cuts, που είναι κάτι που όλοι μας νομίζω πάνω κάτω ξέρουμε. Η Kimberly Bradley, η οποία είναι δημοσιογράφος στο Monocle, στο Art-Agenda και σε διάφορα άλλα περιοδικά τέχνης, θα συντονίσει τη συζήτηση και θα βοηθήσει στις ερωτήσεις και ελπίζουμε να υπάρξουν πολλές. Kimberly, you like to introduce again in English? Yeah. Press.
Am I on? Okay, yes, I am. As Marina just said in Greek, I'm Kimberly Bradley. I'm a journalist based in Berlin. I write a lot for the general press, Monocle, New York Times, but also for the art press. And I'm going to be moderating these two fine gentlemen. First up, Ricardo Nicolau will be explaining everything he does in Porto. Would you like to start?
Yeah. In 15 minutes, so I have to say that I'm terrified. So thank you, Marina, for the kindly invitation, and Art-Athina, of course, and you for coming. So, as Kimberly said, I am Portuguese, which, by the way, it helps, at least using taxis in this city, because they love hearing I'm Portuguese. So apparently we are on the same boat. And I want to talk about something that I consider even more difficult than financial cuts, which are ideological cuts. But before that, I have to speak a bit about the place where I come from, not Portugal, but Serralves, the museum, so that you understand what I'm talking about. So Serralves is what I call a sociological miracle. In a country as centralized as Portugal, where everything happens in Lisbon, in the capital, the government decided to create in the 80s a contemporary art center or contemporary art museum. I think that they decided to do it in Porto and not in Lisbon because of, well, guilt, of course, because nothing was happening in Porto, but also because as a management model, they decided from the start to create a foundation, half private, half state. And all the Portuguese tycoons or the owners of companies were based in Porto, and they needed private money. So all the tycoons from Porto were very happy to help this project from the start. So the foundation was created in the mid-80s and the museum in the mid-90s. The first director of the museum was Vicente Todoli, this Spanish guy that maybe you know because he was the director of Tate Modern for 7 years. Now he is retired, and I envy him very much. And when he first arrived to Porto, well, to start with, he was lucky enough to arrive in '96, when the art market was so low that you could still buy historical works from the 60s and 70s. So we decided that in terms of collection and program, it would all, in terms of chronological arc, it would all start in the mid-60s. That's why we still have an important collection of the 60s and 70s. And he was smart enough to think from the start that being in a very being in the ultimate periphery could, instead of being a problem, be helpful. So he decided from the start, okay, I will work in this specific way because I'm not in London, I'm not in New York, people are not expecting me to show the artists that are shown all around, so I'll do something different. And that's something that happened during Vicente's time in the museum, during the second director of the museum, João Fernandes, and I hope during the third director just started working. Her name is Suzanne Cotter, and she's been working there for 2 months. And I hope we don't lose this feeling that being in a very peripheric context can be helpful instead of being a problem. And that's where the ideological cuts enter. Yesterday I was telling someone, that sounds like a joke, but it's important for what we do in the museum. In this kind of poetic / historical justice, my country, Portugal, is being bought by the former colonies. So Africa and Brazil are now buying every single Portuguese company. Which in my mind is not a problem. Actually, I always say very proudly I'm not nationalistic, but I am a bit, because we are not nationalistic at all. Because no one is proud of being Portuguese, and I don't see it as a problem. So, Angola and Brazil, they are buying Portugal. And suddenly, 2 things started happening in Portugal. Well, to start with, lots of artists from Brazil, from Angola, and from Mozambique started showing their work in Portugal. And for one side, because they are paying for the shows, like the Angola government is paying to have shows of Angolan artists in Portugal. Also because there's a new interest when we talk about Portuguese curators and artists and looking back at our colonial past. But the problem for me is sometimes I don't see the difference between this, what I call this new interest, and the fact that the money comes from there. So if you go to a museum in Portugal and they are showing artists from Africa or from Brazil, you don't know if a curator was curious enough to go there and know the context, or if he was just receiving the show because it's already paid. So this creates some problems, especially in a place like Serralves. Serralves is often accused of being a place where, imagine, the first 2 directors were men, and they were showing and buying work from, not exclusively, but mainly from men, from European men. So we are often accused of being a museum which is Eurocentric and like male-oriented. And I can understand that you want to change this, but I always have this doubt. If the change is natural, it's because of pure curiosity or because they are paying for it. At the same time, and going back to the first director, Vicente, when I told you that he was smart enough to understand that in the periphery he could make things totally different, or ironically, he managed to put Porto in the map because Porto was not in the map. And this is interesting. But at the same time, with this ideological cuts, more than financial cuts, more and more sponsors, and I told you we are foundation, so we are half private, half state, and more sponsors are asking for exhibitions of famous artists, or artists that you can see everywhere. So my fear is that with the financial cuts, but even more with the ideological cuts, institutions that were known for being different will become, well, the same as every single institution in the world. That is why I was talking, and I fear so much what I call ideological cuts. I have to say that one of my last shows in Serralves was about something that you can see as this kind of trend in Portuguese art. You now see very young Portuguese. Apparently, every young Portuguese artist is suddenly interested in working with our or about our colonial past, which in some cases I feel natural in the context of the artist's work and research, and sometimes I feel a bit suspicious about his sudden interest in Africa. As you know, it sells this kind of work. But I was telling you that last year I did a show of an artist who was dealing with our colonial past, but he was not Portuguese. He was French. Well, he had a Portuguese father that he never met. And I'm saying he's French, but actually he was born in the French Guiana, which talks a lot about French culture, because you can be raised in South America and behave as a French guy and talk as a French guy. Actually, unfortunately for them, French Guiana is the only country in South America where euro is still the official coin. So Mathieu Abonanc, it's his name. He did this film that we commissioned in Serralves about Militant. He did a film about film. Well, it's very French, no? Making films about films. But in this case, I should like his work. I invited him, and I do like. But he made this film about militant cinema, and what was the importance of militant cinema in the liberation movements in the, well, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but in the 60s. We were the last colony to leave Africa in '74. So these liberation movements were quite active till 1974. And in my opinion is perspective on our history, the fact that it doesn't have any kind of relationship to Angola or to Mozambique helped him having some kind of independence on his perspective. But I'm not going to talk about Mathieu's show. I think that you by now know what I mean about ideological cuts. And I'm not even going to spend 15 minutes because I'm counting.
Thank you for being so wonderfully succinct. That was fantastic and very interesting. We are going to, excuse me, Adnan Yildiz from Künstlerhaus Stuttgart in southern Germany will now give a presentation on not only his program and his institution, but on the concept of audience.
I think now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to bring together a lecture that I have done, which was a bit longer, and take some points because I want to respond to Marina's invitation. First of all, I'm also somehow coming from south, which is south of Germany, and I'm from Turkey, and since 2011, I'm doing the program for Künstlerhaus Stuttgart. Künstlerhaus Stuttgart in the provincial area seems to be a very experimental platform for very long years. It has been founded by the Stuttgart-based artists. At that time, I mean, you can imagine there was a polarity between painting and sculpture, and the galleries were very strong, but selling a lot and not interested in the local context. So now when I speak with the director of the academy, she still complains, we don't have a sound department, we don't have a film department, because Künstlerhaus Stuttgart for very long years in 70s, 80s, 90s filled this gap. It's 35 years old. next Friday we are celebrating our anniversary. And the history is great. I mean, I took over a great heritage in terms of, in the archive I see exhibitions from Group Material, Absalon and Golden, or the directors before, like Nicolas Schaffhausen, Utameta Bauer, Elke Austen More. So it's really a kind of lively space in the middle of Germany. And my story starts with psychology. I studied psychology. I have nothing to do with art. I don't come from art background. I'm really terrible with art history, but I'm very interested in different things, especially the image, because I always wanted to become a writer. I think I was too lazy to become a fiction writer, and somehow image triggered us. These two images were proposed to Künstlerhaus Stuttgart as a kind of 4 years investigation of how we look at the image, especially the sky and the screen, because the first image is taken from a miniature. It's from 16th century, and it describes what has happened in the 3rd of Murat time. It's an observatory house. It functioned for 10 years, and later, by the order of the same Sultan, it was demolished. This is a lot about the Ottoman and Turkish history. We set up things, it works, and after a while, we destroy them. And the second image is, I think everybody knows, it's one of the most personalized and maybe publicly shared image. Desktop, sky and the grass, and this archetype of sky still in this virtual sense of reality brings a lot of questions around inspiration, imagination. And this is what I'm interested in, because I came to the art field from psychology, dealing with literature, poetry, film, and video. And now the program is not very different from what I have been dealing with. So jumping from psychology and ending up in curating, I studied at Konstfack. Konstfack is in Stockholm, and it's not a school, it's not a curatorial study program, it's more like a kind of research-based residency at that time. I stayed in there for 2 years, and we programmed, as participants, we programmed the curator lab thing together with the other participants. So we were mostly traveling and doing projects, and I think I worked with Mons Range, Marisha Lewandowska. So also I worked a lot with the artists. So when I was appointed for Künstlerhaus Stuttgart, I thought, I mean, it was also my first institutional job in that sense as a director. So I thought I should work with the artists, and I should just deal with the whole situation through learning from them. So for 2 years, investigating how the institutional space should be transformed, how I deal with the organization of time and space in the institution, to what extent, for whom we invest. I asked all these questions with the artists. So there were 12 positions, and the selection was based on several different criteria, including audience, time, and space, which always 3 main elements for me in terms of programming, like how we decide. I'm going to show you the latest solo exhibitions from Slavs and Tatars and Cevdet Erek in a different perspective. This is just a kind of form of publication which will come out, also with the same title with this talk. And about the solo projects, what was challenging was the artists had quite a lot of power. They curated their own shows in a way. And there was a fair distribution of the budget, and each artist also had the challenge to extend the budget through some applications. We did with some of them, and some of them decided to invest on other things. And at that level, when I arrived, I observed the house as a kind of 4 floors with administration, 2 exhibition floors. I don't know why, but cut in between with studios. So it doesn't allow you to make a cognitively coherent exhibition as a group show. So architecturally speaking, also it was a very smart idea to bring 2 positions, different positions, sometimes opening same time, closing same time, sometimes zigzagging them, so you can circulate in a different sense. We always experiment. There was always different flyers. There were some editions. There were some posters. I want to show you a kind of strategy we developed. So mostly I had always invitation cards, but plus when you come in the space, there was a kind of newspaper format with interviews. So one of the most critical points of this artistic dialogues thing was I wanted to provide artistic voice heard by the audience. I wanted them to read the artist. We didn't wanted to present the exhibitions like Künstlerhaus presents, but we wanted them to present themselves. There is a reason behind this, because Künstlerhaus, as I said, is founded by the artist, and the idea to transform it in a contemporary form of institution today was based on opening it up as a big artist studio. So now when I get emails from different people, can I show this work at your place? Can I organize a discussion at your institution? I am mostly very open as long as there is not a kind of, let's say, politically incorrect situation. So now what you are seeing is the last episode of Artistic Dialogues. At the end, we experiment with the space. Slavs and Tatars extended to the floor, which was mainly based on the sound piece from Cevdet Erek. And Cevdet Erek also put 2 pieces in Slavs and Tatar space. I mean, they opened the same time and closed the same time, going back to the first episode. I designed the exhibitions more like a kind of episode state of mind, like films, TV series, novels, like bringing them together, not around a theme or a concept, but mostly in accordance with their approach to the space, how they treat the material, what they bring from their studio, how they communicate with the audience, what is important for them. And in time, we solved a lot of problems. You know, when I arrived, the institution was clearly defined by previous directors, but you feel, I mean, internationally it's a recognized institution, but on the other hand, in time there were a lot of international shows and a bit disconnected with the local context. So when I arrived, I decided to make summer shows related with the context. The first show in the first year was called Wie geht's dir Stuttgart? How are you doing Stuttgart? So we invited 12 artists. It was very good timing because Stuttgart at that time was dealing with the train station. Train station was a big issue. Politicians wanted to get rid of the old station and they wanted to install a big shopping mall, and of course this brought a lot of different political directions, like old people who have a nostalgic feeling with their city, Green Party people, left-wing people, right-wing people. We all came together and we protested. So I also took the advantage of this political issue, and this created a big problem with the local politics, but I am not from there, so I played the outsider role, and it worked a lot. The second year, I decided to open the space for workshops. I mean, we also provide lithography, silk screen printing, and a lot of other traditional fine arts studios. And the artists complain a lot because for them, we are like Dida Oben, like the ones at the top. So after 20 years, I decided to show them around materiality, self-organization, and working space. The board was not very happy in the beginning. They were afraid of their very international program to be kind of losing its credits. But I think it was a very well presentation, and of course, I cannot solve the 35 years of social problems in the house. But what I believe is we are human beings and we bring life to the institution. So I did my best to create a kind of better working space. Apart from this, I don't know if I managed to become a writer or not. Voluntarily, every week, you don't believe me or not, I do this. Every Sunday it is out, and it's in Turkish. So people who wants to follow me, it's like a bit notes from Stuttgart. You see the logo. It's like a paper plane thrown from Stuttgart, and mostly it's a kind of blog format. The first column is punkt, like the point of the week, and then I write a bit discursive in the middle, and the right column is always for the contributors, footnotes, references, other things. So it gave me a kind of discipline dealing with an institution with 4 floors, writing every week, a huge page, kind of editing. So at the end of the day, I can say I started my interest in contemporary art through biennials, because Istanbul Biennial is like a school. When I started to get in touch with contemporary art, we didn't have a contemporary art museum. We didn't have fine arts department, but we had the biennial. It was like a school, you know. The first thing I saw as the biggest thing was Yuko Hasegawa's biennial. I was fascinated. I really wanted to become a curator then. And now I feel like after this experience, moving from the biennial side, I believe in institutions very much. Do I have some more time? We can stop here and you can...
You have 4 minutes.
I have 4 minutes. Okay, very good. I think I can share you with this year's program because this is a year-long performance program and it's a kind of homage to the institution and artists are invited to make interventions, performances and radical change in the institution from membership card to the organization of space. We will keep the tracks, reminiscence and all kinds of material during the year. I hope it will portray the house. Maybe this is the most romantic project I have ever done, but I'm very proud of it. It's called I. And next Friday we are opening Apparatus Criticus. I mean, after a very long time, it's the first exhibition I did in terms of group shows. So after, in Islam, in Ramadan we don't eat and we don't drink, so we retreat ourselves. It's almost a kind of same strategy. I didn't do any group shows in the curatorial or conceptual way. This is the first time coming up very soon, next Friday. I invited another curatorial position and we decided to make 2 exhibitions, creating one space and collaborating with another initiation from the city to provide research material during the same time. It deals with critical distance and how artists construct their relationships with their subjects. So what I can say at the end of the day, for describing what I do as a curator, also stealing the term from psychology, I think I am kind of functioning like a scaffolding. You know, when the project is not there, when the production is not there, but the research and the idea is there, I can function like a scaffolding, and I like that I'm very invisible when the process is kind of coming to a final presentation form. So I think curators have responsibility about making things public. I mean, I'm not using public only in terms of public space or public artworks, but like making things public, like when I decide to tell you about myself. So I'm done.
Okay, before I open the floor to audience questions, I have a few journalistic questions of my own that I'm going to ask these 2 guys. First question is to Ricardo. You have a new director, and you were talking about this issue of the financial support from other countries coming in and affecting program. Do you and the new director have a new vision? What do you think would solve some of the problems that you alluded to? Would it be a mix of taking these prepackaged, prepaid shows, a mix of showing just Portuguese artists, some blockbuster shows to increase audiences? What is the vision that you are imagining?
Well, first of all, being a bit suspicious of the South. Okay, Portugal is in the South, but Africa is even more. But not of, well, other countries. And as I said, for the first time we have a woman as a director and someone who is acquainted to different contexts that we never worked with in the past. And I'm talking about the Middle East, for example. And so what I sincerely hope is that we can disobey this feeling in Portugal that you should make shows on artists or with artists from Angola and from Mozambique and from Brazil, unless you go there and you discover a fantastic scene that you want to work with, but not in a colonial way. I mean, it would be very stupid to go to Angola or to Mozambique to show a parcel of our collection, for example. That's what I think. And I also think, and I was hearing my partner in his table talking about the responsibility of the curator, and I do feel that Serralves, like lots of other institutions, is becoming more and more bureaucratic, and that's a problem. I mean, even if I don't, I'm not the biggest fan of his work as a curator, I always remember this famous sentence by Andrew Renton, a British curator, who, when asked, what do you do as a curator? He said something like, okay, my task is to not letting the elevator doors close, which is, what are you talking about? It has lots of metaphors with hotels, as every single curator, as you can imagine why. And what he's saying with this metaphor is that whenever you're in a hotel with someone and you go and try to have breakfast at 10, all the elevators are being used. So it's very difficult to... But when it finally arrives, if your partner remembers, okay, I forgot something in the room, I have to go back, you have this huge problem, I have to make the elevator doors, I have to keep them opened. And with this metaphor, what he's trying to say is that as a curator working in an institution, one of your main tasks is to allow the artist to change his mind till the last minute, which is of course difficult, and all the other departments of the museum are asking you as a curator to help the artist crystallize the work. And when you say, oh, but my task is not helping the artist to crystallize the work, it's the opposite. I'm like giving you information about the work, but allowing, or at least telling the artist that he can change his mind till the last minute. Actually, now that I'm talking about Andrew Renton, he made this show in Portugal like 3 years ago, and the title was Come, Come, Come Into My World. Back then I didn't know it's a song by Kylie Minogue, and when asked what does Kylie Minogue have to do with contemporary art, he said, and he was not being cynical, because Kylie Minogue, just like Duchamp, they are like tofu. They don't have any flavor, but they absorb everything that's next to them. Okay, this is not a hotel metaphor, and I said he was an expert in hotel metaphors. He has a second metaphor with hotels that I like. When asked, what's a good exhibition? He says, and I have to agree, it's like when you're making the check-out of this hotel where you've been for, let's say, a couple of weeks, and everything seems a bit changed. Like if the plastic palm tree have grown, which is impossible, as if they decided to make some changes. So what he's saying is that you should not recognize immediately the same pieces you see when you enter a show when you're leaving. Because this experience, the synapses that you make while seeing the show, should prevent you from recognizing immediately the works that you've seen. Okay, this has nothing to do with the question, sorry.
Okay. I have another question for Adnan. You have opened up Künstlerhaus Stuttgart to the local people, that's what you're saying, but what you didn't explain is how did the local people respond to your kind of open studio concept? What has been the response from the community? Do you have more visitors? Is there more discourse?
I think my strategy comes from a very simple observation that most of the curators here follow. I mean, when you go to any kind of opening, and if the opening is from a local artist, definitely it's clear that you see more audience. And I wanted to bring the audience, the generation back, because when I was dealing with 4 floors, with a lot of workshops, a lot of studios, I also feel the need to regenerate. Because a lot of young artists today, they don't do silk screen printing or lithography or ceramic, you know. You see the average number of people the average age group who use these workshops, it's over 50, and definitely in 10 or 20 years, if a lot of people are not interested in these forms of production, they're not going to be there. So the idea was to regenerate the workshops through some productions, like, I don't know, like we produce some silk screen print with Slavs and Tatars. Aaron Engel came last time before this show opening. He produced the whole piece with really 50, 60 years old ladies who are doing hobby art in a way in the same workshop. So I think I tried to manage to bring the exhibition program through the production, and somehow this interest turned into workshops. You know, it brought younger people. In another sense, there's another project maybe I should shortly mention. Last year, for 6 months, we collaborated with the University of Stuttgart Architecture Department. In the beginning, they wanted to give me a lecture, like a simple lecture. You go to a school for 2 hours, you talk about contemporary art, mostly Istanbul-related architectural change, urban development. Well, I invited the students to the house. 1 or 2 days, we spent a full day together, and at the end, I invited them to investigate a very simple question: how does location influence an artistic circulation? And this material that I got through them, like how they use different social network, also the spots in the city, I mean how students also organize their life. Basically, I wanted to bring students, I wanted to bring young artists, and I wanted to bring the neighbors into the house. You know, one of the things we did within the form of first year's program was we organized the illegal street party, which was turning into a kind of hell situation because the police arrived and you have to solve all these problems in Germany. But I think somehow it was cool to be on that side because definitely it was back to the 70s again. Because I think at the end of the day, also how we communicated with the audience, it was a very beautiful image from 78. Voices there, and an artist from the local scene is coming and taking out his T-shirt like a kind of protest against Fluxus. So I think what we did was trying to remember those artistic motivations that constructed the house years ago. So, yeah.
So you're working with the legacy of the house. Okay, I have one more question before I open it up. You write your column in Turkish, but is it distributed in Germany?
Not really, but now we are doing the publication for Audience Time and Space. So the publication will be composed of some texts that I use as a reader. For instance, Timing from Maria Lind. It's an amazing article. If you run an institution, if you are interested in how institutions organize their programs, read it. So I bring a reader together and I treat the exhibition material as image and the flyers or this interview stuff. And at the very end, there's a selected part in 3 languages developed from this text. Mostly they are very cynical and a bit critical and a bit bitchy, I would say.
Bitchy, okay. I'd love to get any questions from the audience on any overriding issues or for either of these gentlemen. Okay.
Hi, I'm Albert. One thing came up, and just to connect both presentations. So Ricardo was talking about ideological cut, and Adnan was talking about only not maybe doing projects which are politically incorrect. So I would like to explain what a politically incorrect project would be like that would not be considered, and how does this relate to the ideological cut that Ricardo was mentioning.
I can easily explain. It's very simple. I mean, recently we host Prayway. You have seen Prayway. It's a kind of big object developed from a tuft, like a big tea garden sitting, and from book standard. So it's for the institutions. Slavs and Tatars proposes this piece because they talk about the institutions as not having enough space for discussion and social gathering. Always these kind of things are happening at the cafeterias, which are running by private-owned situations. So they want the audience to sit on it. And since we get some invitations, I also can keep the piece for 2 years. I'm very lucky because a Munich-based collector bought the piece, and I'm very much in touch with her. And instead of just showing it as an exhibition material, we want to locate it in the house and spot the things happening in the house. One of the things that people ask me if they can do it in a house or not, Evangelische Church, like they are organizing a discussion about public space, and the audience. And I was very happy to bring this very Islamic form with the Christian discussion, but I would never host a neo-Nazi discussion at Künstlerhaus. Like, this is an example.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes? No? I have another question for you. Does the public have response to your museum, and do they have opinions? Is this programming shift, is it controversial in the press? Is it something that's being discussed?
As I told you before, Porto is the second city of Portugal after Lisbon. And the main difference is that no one living in Lisbon is from Lisbon, and more than half of the people living in Porto are from Porto. So they are always extremely proud of every single sign of success of the city. And they will go and support the project, even if at the beginning they don't understand anything. So I think that part of the success of Serralves comes from this thing that I used to hate, called in Portuguese bairrismo, which means this is my district or this is my city. But it really helped. It also helped the fact that we have a very, well, this would be a long conversation, a very strong education department. What is a very strong education department anyway? Education departments are more and more in institutions asked to perform every single task you can imagine, like every single, when a sponsor comes and asks for anything, the first question, the first reply is always, okay, the education department will sort it out. We'll think of something for your company, for your project, so I think that rethinking the education department's role inside an institution is extremely urgent and important. So, to answer you, people come. Even if they don't understand in the beginning, people come. What I do feel would be, and was in the past, a bit incorrect, politically speaking, is that as FRAC, Serralves has this responsibility of using our collection to show it, at least parcels of the collection, in all these cultural centers that were constructed in the last 10 years for nothing in Portugal, because they don't have anyone programming the space, you just have the building. And so every single municipality asks from Serralves to show parcels of the collection. And sometimes it was like putting a flag. Okay, Serralves was here, so you as the mayor can say, I worked with Serralves last year. So everything we would ask from people was, please open the door of your space, let us in, we installed the work, blah, blah, blah. So this I would call incorrect, politically speaking. What we try to make in the past, and we still do, is to, every time a municipality asks us to show parcels of the collection, ask external curators to make shows that make sense in that specific time, place, context, even if they don't make sense anywhere else. And think of specific shows using our collection for that context. I don't know if this is more correct politically. I have lots of doubts concerning the way we use our collection to show it outside a museum.
Oops, we can get the microphone to you.
My name is Ingo. Ricardo, one question. What kind of people would be sitting in these committees or in the brainstorming organizational process? Except of you organizing these exhibitions. What kind of people do you think are important for such a kind of independent exhibition?
Well, you have two ways of working with the so-called community. What we try to do in Porto is visit schools, visit universities, run artist spaces. This is the opposite of inviting them and saying, okay, you should come every time because it's very important what we are doing. So we think that it is important what they're doing, and we go there. And often we make projects with them. They cannot, sometimes they're not shows, they are just like panels or conversations or whatever. But for the buying of pieces, like in FRAC, again, we have this committee. We invite people to come every year and decide with us if it's pertinent to buy this piece from this artist or not.
Anything? Well, Marina's standing up. That means we're done.
That we should close here.
Okay.
And thank you so much. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. And don't forget to come back at 5:30, where Marieke Van Hal, Alian Sethi, and Juan Caitan will speak about biennials. Don't run away. Γεια σας, ευχαριστούμε πολύ.